Hey, how's it going, guys? Here we are back in the studio because you guys didn't give me any more ideas of places to film in. So we're back in the boring old studio. Sure would love to get out and about and go somewhere else. Hint, hint. Tell me somewhere to go. Just kidding, but seriously, tell me somewhere to go. Hey, we're going to be finishing our Easter series today. So we're really excited about that as we wrap up this series. Man, if you're able to join us for drive-in church on Friday evening, man, that was so awesome. So excited that you guys were able to be there. For those of you that I was able to see, I miss you guys. I can't wait till we're back together again. But let's hop in. So first questions, which you guys can't answer because you're not here in person, but just maybe text me or something like that. Anybody out there actually like Peeps? Like, you know, the marshmallow things, the little birds and the bunnies. Melanie shaking her head no behind the camera, because they are utterly disgusting. And if you actually like Peeps, please do tell me so that I can silently judge you for the rest of our life together. They're not even like marshmallows. They're completely the opposite of Easter happiness. But the crazier part is that when Easter rolls around, every grocery store just stocks up on Peeps. Like there's gonna be this massive exodus of people coming out of their homes and into their grocery stores to buy these disgusting pieces of candy. And the even crazier part is people actually wait until after Easter and then they go to these grocery stores and they stock up on Peeps. Like, what are you gonna do with a lifetime supply of Peeps until the next Easter? I don't understand it. It's disgusting, and it's actually a source of strife in my home because Elkie actually kind of likes Peeps, and we always disagree on this and how disgusting they are. They're a terrible snack, and they're not even fulfilling. They taste gross. They taste like chalk, but she really likes them, and it's been a source of issues in my marriage. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. You know, Peeps have never actually caused a fight in my house, but I definitely don't feel like I'm alone in this. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is the idea of being alone. Now, as you guys, some of you know, I moved around a lot in my earlier life. You know, when I was in 5th grade, my mom married this guy while we were living in Costa Rica, and then because of them getting married a couple months later, we actually moved to Arizona. And some of you may know, that didn't work out, so we moved back to Costa Rica, and then we decided to move back to Arizona. If you don't know where Costa Rica is, it's a little country in Central America. So we're not talking about moving across town or even moving across the United States. We're talking about moving across the continent. And this was a really tough time for me. So even though I'm heavily extroverted and I love people and I love being around people, it was very tough for me those first couple months to fight the feeling of being alone. I was in a new place that had a completely different culture than something I was used to. People spoke a language that I wasn't used to because English wasn't my first language. And it was just different, and I couldn't help but feel alone through it all. And I understand that, that I had my family and I had, some people around me, but at the same time, there was always this feeling for those first couple months that nobody understood me and that I was alone. And maybe you felt that way before. Maybe your family moved, or your friends changed and they left, or maybe there was a breakup, or maybe there were certain decisions that you wanted to make and that others didn't understand. Or maybe there was a doubt or a question that you had and no one understood you in that doubt or question. And I think we all understand the feeling of being alone. And this feeling is it's a completely different feeling from the feeling of independence or freedom. So this type of on your own feeling is that feeling of loneliness or fear of or uncertainty and anxiety. It's all kind of wrapped up into one. And when we feel alone, we start believing things that aren't true. We start thinking that people don't get us and that they never will, or that we won't get through what is going on currently. So we feel more alone, and that isolation intensifies. Man, you might even be feeling it right now with the fact that we can't leave our homes. You may even feel like because you can't see your friends, you have this feeling of loneliness. So here's the sad part about loneliness. Statistically speaking, almost 50% of Americans feel alone. That's half of the population of our country feel alone. And sometimes being alone is cool. As an extrovert, I don't relate to that feeling of it being cool, but I asked my wife about it and she thinks it's awesome. I can't say that I relate to it, but sometimes being on your own is cool. But there's a difference between being alone and feeling alone. The difference between being alone and lonely. The sense of loneliness has contributed to increase in numbers of depression, increase in self-harm. And why? It's because loneliness and that feeling can lead us to feeling helpless. Now think about it. When we feel alone, we tend to feel overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by our situations, our circumstances, our feelings, our pain, our confusion, whatever it may be, it just keeps piling on. And the crazy thing is that God created this in us. Now, I'm not saying that God wanted us to feel that way, but like I always say, we were created to be in community. We were created to be around others and around people. We weren't made to be alone. That's why we get these negative feelings when it happens, because it's going against the way that God created us. So what do? Showing up for our friends is important. Being in a small group is important. But there are times when being alone and feeling alone is inevitable. It's just something that happens. So how do we handle it? Well, here's where we look at Easter, or more importantly, the days after Easter. That part of the story can actually give us an answer. So the very first Easter would have left Jesus' followers and his friends feeling a very similar way. Think about it. For years, they had this traveling partner, their friend, their teacher, their rabbi. They followed him around. They lived life together for many, many years. They taught people. They watched him heal people. They were used to always being together. And then something happened, and it was all taken away. And Easter sermons don't really focus on the in-between time, but I can promise you that this time was a time that was all that the disciples thought about. They probably never forgot how difficult those 3 days were between when Jesus died and when he came back. Now remember, Jesus' closest friends and disciples and his family, they were around him all the time, and they didn't grow up with Jesus. They left everything. They left their jobs, they left their families, they left their loved ones to follow Jesus. All their hobbies and things like that. They had a future in mind with him. And then before you know it, it was all gone. And now they were alone. They had no clue what was going to happen next. But we know how the story goes, but they didn't at the time. Imagine how pumped they were when Jesus was alive again. When Jesus resurrected from the dead, they were probably so excited. They were finally not feeling alone. Well, that is until Jesus leaves again. So Jesus leaves that second time. Now, Jesus was there. He came alongside of them. He was with them. Then he dies. Then 3 days later, he comes back from the grave, and he spends some time among them again. And you can almost feel like the hope is coming back into them. Then he leaves again. That second time was probably so difficult for him, and we know what happens because of Luke. Now, if you don't know who Luke is, Luke was one of the disciples, and he was actually a physician. And Luke wrote the book of Luke. And another book that he wrote was the book of Acts. And the book of Acts is exactly what it sounds like. It details what happened and what actions the followers took after Jesus had ascended to heaven, and how they acted once this was all said and done. If you really dig into it, Christianity, as we know it, didn't really blow up and take off, growing like crazy until after Jesus left. And it even seems like Jesus meant for this to happen. And if we look further in, we'll see that this is true. And so I want us to check out this verse that was written by John, who was Jesus' good friend. So this is the book of John, chapter 16, verse 7. He says this: "But in fact, it is best for you that I go away." This is Jesus talking. He's talking to the disciples at a meal, and he's saying to them, in fact, it might be better for you if I go away. So imagine the shock in their faces when their teacher, their rabbi, the person they've been following around for all these years says, it's probably better for you if I go away. John continues, quoting what Jesus says, and the rest of the verse says, "Because if I don't, the advocate won't come. If I do go away, then I will send him to you." And that's John 16, verse 7. And Jesus says, in order for the advocate to come, he needs to go. Now, advocate usually means someone who helps or comforts or defends others. That same definition can be used here. He's talking about what we call the Holy Spirit. Now, it's basically the Spirit of Jesus living among us, even though he wasn't there after he left physically. Even though he's not here physically present, his Spirit lives among us. He's the one that comes to help us, to comfort us, to give us wisdom that is far greater than anything that we have for ourselves. The Holy Spirit came to earth after Jesus left. So Jesus promises that we're going to be better off once he leaves. And why is that? Because his Spirit would be here. The power and Spirit that was in Jesus now is everywhere, except instead of just being with Jesus. So right before Jesus leaves, he reminds them of what he said. And when he leaves, his Spirit would be among us. So it says in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere in Jerusalem, through Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." And that's Acts 1:8. Of all the things that Jesus could have said when he was leaving, one of the things that he mentions is that his Spirit will be dwelling among us. That the Holy Spirit is on the way. It was going to come and give them power so that they would be able to take the gospel to every corner of the world. In other words, Jesus was telling them that though he was leaving, they would never be alone. That his people would never be alone. And that's exactly what happened. When he left, his followers received the Holy Spirit and took the gospel to every corner. And today, roughly a third of the earth claims that they know who Jesus is and have a relationship with him. Here's some cool points about this movement. It outlasted things like the insanely powerful Roman Empire. That empire was one of the greatest things that the world has ever seen, and it didn't last long, but the gospel still outlasted it. It outlasted the intense persecution from the government during those times. It outlasted years of change during those times. The men and women that Jesus left twice went on to start the greatest movement in history. Even when their leader was seemingly gone, even though they had lack of resources, even though they felt powerless in the face of being alone, the Holy Spirit gave them the ability. Even though they were powerless, the Holy Spirit gave them power. So even when Jesus left, they weren't alone. And the best part of the promise of an advocate wasn't that promise wasn't just for the people back then. Guys, that promise is for us right now. The advocate who gives power is true for everyone that would ever believe in Jesus. And that means that you and I have that same access to that power. See, Easter is so much more than a celebration of what happened 2,000 years ago. Jesus' resurrection changed everything, and it is the center of what we believe. It is also a reminder that we have great power that lives in us today. Now, Easter can change our lives because it means that we truly are never alone. And the first followers knew what it was like to be alone. When Jesus died, they felt lost, and they were so happy when he came back. And I can't help but imagine that they felt devastated when he said that he was leaving again. And they might have even wondered how they were going to move on from this and how in the world him leaving was going to be good. And soon they learned that it actually was, because Jesus left someone behind, the advocate, the Holy Spirit, to look after all of us. So what does this mean to us? How does this change our lives if we lived the way that they did whenever they received the Holy Spirit? If we never felt alone because the Holy Spirit is with us, how does that change us? Maybe I need to make this a little more direct for you guys. What if this is real? What if the literal, actual God who created everything, died, and rose again is literally always with you? What if the Holy Spirit is very real and wants to help you with what you're facing today? Simply trusting that the Holy Spirit is with us can change everything. In fact, even though we can't see him and we may not always feel like he's there, knowing that he's with us during these rough moments can make us confident in a few things. Number one, you can talk to him anytime, any place, for any reason. When you feel alone, you can get in touch with God. Even when you don't know what to say, the Holy Spirit bridges that gap. Just talk to him. And number two is you are actually stronger than you think. The odds were always against the followers of Jesus. Think about it. Any story you read about them, the odds were always against them. They were unqualified, the government was stronger, and it was a brutal government, and they still changed the world with the gospel. The deck may be stacked against you, but God throws that deck out the window. Remember, Easter means you are never alone. And as we wrap up today, I want you to ask yourself this question. In what areas do you feel alone in? Now, when you have the answer to that question, remember that the same power of the Spirit of the New Testament lives in you now. You are never alone. Guys, we love you so much. We miss you. I know I say this every week. Cannot wait to be back together with you guys. Make sure you're keeping in touch with your small group leaders and getting those small groups done and getting some community that way. And also make sure you're joining us Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 10:30 for our Zoom calls as we go through the book of Proverbs. See you guys next week.